Hey there, and welcome to this little mini course for beginners. Today we're going to make a very simple version of the game Flappy Bird using PICO-8, and we're going to explain everything as we go. We're going to take it really slow, and this should be perfect even if you've never done game development before, even if you haven't really used PICO-8. And by the end, we'll have a nice little simple start to a game that's, heavily inspired by Flappy Bird. Okay, let's go. When you open up PICO-8, it looks like this. The first thing I like to do is save my project. You can do that by saying SAVE space, whatever the name is. So we'll call this Flappy, and then we can hit return, and it says saved flappy.p8. Now let's switch into editor mode. I'll hit escape, and this is where we can write our code. Before we even worry about that, let's sort of mock up our game. Over here in this second tab, this is where we can draw pixel art. We draw up here, and then there's sections here where we can draw our different sprites. And we can put those on our map in this tab. So let's go ahead and select the blue color and the paint bucket. And I'll just select one of these lower squares. It doesn't really matter where. How about 33? And we'll fill this in with blue. And then I'll select the square next to it. I'll also fill that in with blue. But I'll switch over to the draw mode and go over to white. And let's make a little cloud. Something like this. Yeah, nice little cloud. A happy cloud, as someone used to say. Okay. So these are a couple of tiles that we can put on our map. If I switch over to this third page, I can draw these tiles wherever I want, like this. I'll just kind of place these clouds kind of all around. Select this blue one, grab fill, and fill this in. So now we have sort of this sky. If I go up here to the upper left and click on this full screen button and fill in more of our map, if I click and hold down on my scroll wheel, like the third button on the mouse, I can kind of pan this around, move this around, and I'll just move it up a little bit and fill that in with blue too, just so we have the whole screen filled with blue. And this will be fine for our map for right now. This is just going to be kind of our background. You can also right click on any tile to pick it, and then you can kind of paint with that without having to open up the palette here. I'll also right click on the blue and kind of get rid of any of these that are just kind of lined up. Yeah, something like that. That's fine. We have officially the most realistic sky ever. Not too bad, right? The other thing that's part of Flappy Bird are these kind of green pipes. And for this one, what I'm going to do is draw a pipe, but I'm going to draw it twice as wide as these tiles. These tiles are 8 pixels wide. So I'm going to roll with my scroll wheel down a little bit, and that's going to make this twice as wide. So 16 by 16. And now here, if I draw, it's in a 16 by 16 square. I'll hit Control Z to get rid of that and switch over. If I click on this a few times, I can switch to rectangle. So let's make a rectangle here at the top of this, maybe something like that to kind of be the top of our pipe. Let's fill this in with green, switch back over to rectangle, hit dark green, and let's fill this side in. I can hold Control to fill, and we'll just do a little bit on each side. This, yeah. And I can take my draw brush and I can add little dots like this to kind of make sort of a gradient here. And that's going to look pretty nice there. And so now we have a pretty cool looking pipe. I can select the black, maybe get rid of these corners, have this rounded a little bit. Also want to just draw in the bottom here, something like that. So this is going to be one of the pipes. And if I roll up with my scroll wheel, I can just see each individual 8x8 tile. And this is going to work pretty well, actually, because I can take these tiles, I can hold Shift and select both of these. And I can hit Control C and then paste each of these like this and make a really long group of tiles here. One thing that's happening is if I zoom out a little bit, this isn't quite working very well. We need to add a green right here on this just to make sure that the tile works like that. So now there isn't any weirdness there and that kind of duplicates just fine. Okay, so that's our pipe, and let's throw this into our map, pick it just like this, and let's say it starts like right here, okay? To select multiples on the map, I can hold down Shift and click and drag to select multiple tiles, and click and drag with my scroll wheel to pan my window, and then I can click and drag with my left button on my mouse just to paint that in. Now we have this kind of black here. The reason for that is because our background here is blue, and we don't have blue here in these tiles. Now, when we actually use this art for the game, it will be blue right here on the edges. If it bothers us right now, we could totally just fill this in blue for now, and we can get rid of this later. It's not a big deal, but we won't actually need it to be blue here in the actual art. So maybe we'll fix that later. But now we have a really good idea of what this is going to look like as far as when this is a real game. Again, same thing, I can shift drag, and then we're gonna have this one kind of going up like this. Yeah, we have the pipes, and we're gonna have the bird flapping sort of in the middle here and trying to fit in between the gap and the pipes. Speaking of that, let's draw our bird. Go ahead and draw this in our first sprite here. And I'll just start with kind of a little circle thing and maybe make it the tail of the bird, maybe make the head, the beak. Yeah, that works pretty well. I drew this a little off center so I can select it with this little marquee, and I can hit up and down on the keyboard to move this around. And let's fill in a wing, and let's maybe try this kind of tan for its wing. Yeah, that works. Good little eye. Yeah. And again, just because we're doing our mock-up, we'll fill this in blue and see how it looks, just putting our bird right here. There we go. There's our little Flappy bird. Now, one thing is, I think it'd be nice to give him a little stroke. So let's just give him a little outline here. We don't have him on the edges. Let's see if that looks weird. It looks a little weird. So maybe we'll just make him a little smaller. And I think that's fine. We can mess with this later if we want to, but I'm not that bothered by his beak not having a stroke around it. Looks pretty cool. So this is the general idea for our game, is we'll have these pipes and they'll move from right to left, and we'll have our bird sort of in the middle, and he'll move up and down depending on if we are pressing a button or not. And as the pipes go by, we're going to try and get our bird to go through the gap. And every time we do that, we get a point, and we just see how many points we can get. So pretty solid idea for our game. We have a lot of our art made already. Let's get this actually going with our code. So switch over to the first tab. And this is officially the scariest part of game dev, just the blank code editor. Just like if you're looking at a blank page about to write a report, kind of the same thing. But we're going to start with writing 3 functions. A function is an event that is called inside of Pico at a certain time. And there are 3 kind of built-in events, like normal events that happen automatically. The first one is init. We'll type exclamation, we'll type underscore init, and then 2 parentheses like this. And then after that, we'll say end. Basically, everything in Pico needs an end after it. So function underscore init, then go down a couple lines, function underscore update, and then function underscore draw. So what does any of this mean? Well, init gets called when the program runs, okay? Update called 30 times a second. And draw is called 30 times a second after update. So whatever code we put in between function and end here is going to happen when this function gets called by Pico. That code is going to run at the very beginning of our game, the first thing that ever happens, and it's just going to happen once. Update is going to be called 30 times a second. So this is great for things like code about if you're going to press down a button or if you want to change something. You know, the normal kind of video game logic mostly goes in update. And then draw happens right after update, and that you generally use to actually put stuff on the screen. So drawing sprites, drawing maps, drawing text, that kind of thing. So this is like thinking as we begin, this is thinking every frame, and this is drawing whatever we thought of. Okay, so let's start with the draw function. And the first thing that we want to do is clear the screen. And we do that using a command which goes CLS and then 2 parentheses. This is also a function that's built into Pico, but it's only called when we type it in here. CLS stands for clear screen. So now if we save this with Control S and we hit Control R to run, we have a black screen because every frame what we're doing is clearing the screen and doing nothing. So good so far. The next thing let's do is draw our map. Easy way to do that is just type MAP and the 2 parentheses. Let's save and run. And look at that. Now we have our map that we just drew. And all this is doing is 30 times a second drawing this map and clearing it and drawing it again. Okay. So that's a pretty good start. But let's go over to our map, and I'm going to right click in one of these sky tiles and just get rid of our bird. So now again, if we draw the map, save, run, there's no bird. Let's go ahead and draw the bird with code. Under draw, under map, I'm just going to add a couple comments here. If you type -- that adds a comment, so that isn't part of the code. It's just a little note for yourself. I'll write in what we're doing here. Draw the map. The next thing let's do is draw our player. So we're going to do this with the command Sprite, so SPR and parentheses, but we're going to put some things inside of the parentheses. And these things will tell this command some information on kind of how to do it. So this part right here is what to do. Inside of the parentheses is how to do it. So how to draw this sprite? Well, the first thing that we need to tell it is what sprite to draw. So let's switch over to our sprite sheet here. The sprite that we want to draw, this number right here, is sprite 1. So we're going to say sprite 1. And if I were to save this and run it right now, it will draw this sprite in the upper left-hand corner. Okay, that's sort of good. But we don't want it in the upper left-hand corner. We want it basically in the middle. And so what we can do is say comma, and then we'll give it an X value, which let's use 63, which is going to draw it sort of in the middle of the screen, and then 63 for the Y as well. Okay, so sprite number X, Y. Save, run, and now there's our guy in the middle of the screen. Okay, we're getting somewhere. But we don't want him to just stay in the middle of the screen. We want to be able to move him around. So now let's go ahead and switch these out for some variables. A variable is just like in math, in school. If you have a word or a letter or something that you want to represent a number, you can put that in place for the number and then just tell Pico what that letter or word means and what number to use whenever you put that in. So we'll call this PX for player X and PY for player Y. And I think up here in the init function, let's take this down a little bit. We're going to define these variables. So PX equals, you just do one equals to tell it what you want a variable to be, to set something. We'll call this 6.3, and then PY equals 6.3. One thing that is a good idea when you have code like this is to indent lines that are inside of these functions, okay? So I'm going to select those and hit tab once, and that will bring that over. That'll just tell everyone that this is inside of this function. Same thing here for draw. Let's grab all of this and move this over, just so it's easy to tell everything that is indented is inside of this function, okay? So now we have PX equals 63, PY equals 63. This is called at the very beginning, so right when we run it. And then when we draw, we're going to draw our sprite at 1, but at PX, PY, which is 63, 63. Let's see what this looks like. Okay, it looks the same as before, which is good. It's supposed to. Now, what we can do with these is we can change this number every frame if we want to. So down here in the update, let's go ahead and say PX equals PX plus 1. What that's going to do is take whatever PX is at that frame, and it's going to add 1 to it. So the first frame, it's going to be 63 and add 1 to it, so it'll make it 64. And then it'll do the draw function, and then it'll go back to update, and it will take the new value of PX, which is 64, and it'll add 1 to it, making it 65. And so what'll happen is the bird will move to the right. So watch this. Look, he's flying to the right. Look at that. Oh, baby. That's awesome. We actually have a little problem with our sprite here. We filled this in black and we want this to be blue. Black is actually transparent by default in Pico. Save. Yeah, there we go. There's our bird. He's flying that way. Okay, so now we officially have some movement, but it's not really the movement that we want. We want him to move up and down, and we also want to be able to control when he moves up and down with a button. So the first thing let's do is switch this to PY, like this. Let's save and run, and now he goes down, which is actually what we want. We want a little bit of gravity here, so I'll just run this again, and he sinks down. That's good. All right, so we'll call this gravity. But we also want him to move up when we push a button. So how do we do that? Well, what we need to do is test if we're pushing a button or not. The way that we do that is with an if statement in the update. So when we're updating, so 30 times a second, we want Pico to ask if we're pushing a button. We can do that by typing if button, BTN, and then the parentheses, and then we'll type then, and a new line end, like that. So, but we also have to tell it which button. Well, in PICO-8, there are two kind of built-in buttons. There's the X button and the O button. And depending on your game controller and all that stuff, that can be several different things. But on the keyboard here, it translates to the X key and the Z key, confusingly. It's just the Z key because it's next to the X key. But I usually like to just start with X, and you can type in this fancy X by hitting Shift X. In fact, if you hit Shift, you can type all kinds of different symbols like this, which is really nice. Okay, but we'll start with button X like that. And what we just made here is an if statement. So this asks if something is true. So if this button is down, then we do something. So if the button is down, why don't we say py equals py minus 1? That's going to do the opposite of this. And let's just see what happens. I'll hit Control S and run. And if I hit X, look, he stops falling. Now we want him to rise, don't we? So why is this happening? Well, think about this. Pico will always do exactly what you tell it to do. So under update, every frame, py gains 1 pixel. If we're holding down this button X, it's also going to lose 1 pixel. So if we have this down, he's going to stay where he is. If we don't, he's going to go down 1. The coordinates in Pico are kind of strange. In the upper left-hand corner, that's 0, 0. And along the x-axis, it goes up. But as you go down the screen, the y-axis goes up. So it's kind of backwards. So if you add to y, he goes down. If you take away from y, he goes up. Just something you have to get used to. So what if we switch this -1 to -2? What'll happen? I'll run this and he sinks down. But if I hold down X, he goes up. Look at that. So now we have some basic controls here. Look at this. Oh, baby. Look at that. So we can control whether he goes up or down, which is getting to sort of what we want to do for our Flappy Bird game. Pretty cool. So one thing that we actually want this to do though is when he flaps his wings, we just want him to like push up for a second and then sink down. So right now we're testing if we push this button, if we have this button down. If we switch this to button P, that's going to test if we just hit it, that frame. And if not, then it's not really going to do anything. So if we hit S and then run, I can hit this, but I can only hit it once. And so it doesn't really do, if I hold it down, he doesn't really do the same thing because it's only calling this every few frames or so. So maybe we take this up a little more, like maybe -6. So now it sort of works. He can kind of flap and kind of go up a little bit, but he's always going down a little more. So maybe we'll do like 10, okay? So now if I hit this fast enough, we can kind of flap, right? And that's sort of what we want. But one thing that's happening is that he's just kind of appearing up there. So like, let's make this a little bit bigger. Like, let's make this like 20. We can see he kind of just jumps to the top, which isn't really what we want. We want him to move up instead of just appearing up. So how do we do something like that? Well, what we really want him to do is kind of just push up gradually and then just for a second and then to kind of stop pushing up. So it's just kind of like if my mouse is the bird, he's normally falling down, but then he goes boom, boom like this. And so it's almost like he's bouncing. To get that kind of smooth movement, we need to do something fancy. So let's go ahead and make a variable called flap, F-L-A-P, and let's start by making this 20 or so. Okay. Now what we could do is type flap here instead of 20, and this is going to do the same thing that it was doing. Okay. So we know that that variable is working. But now, why don't we do this? Every time that we hit this button, let's set flap to 20. And then every frame, let's make flap a little bit less. Flap equals flap -1. And let's actually make another if here. So if flap is greater than 0, then we'll make flap 1 less. And let's take this part where we're applying that flap and let's actually just take this out too. We'll put this after our flap stuff. So here's what we're going to do. If we hit this button, we're setting flap to 20. After that, if flap is greater than 0, we're going to take 1 away from flap. And then every frame, regardless of what we're doing right here, we're applying flap to player Y, okay? Let's also set our initial flap back to 0, okay? So right now, if we don't hit anything, we gotta put a then right there. Right now, if we don't hit anything, he'll fall down. But if I hit X, he'll flap and he'll go zoom up pretty high like this. So it's like a space flap, which is not quite what we want, but the thing that's nice is he actually moves up instead of just appearing up. So what we need to do is just set this flap to a little bit less. So maybe let's do 2. Oops, maybe needs a little more than that. Say 5. So now you can see kind of what we're getting at. And we just got to change this around to be 10. See, now we're getting somewhere really cool. So every frame we're applying less flap and we're just resetting the amount of flap that we start with when we hit X. And this is a pretty good start, I would say. I'd say maybe it's a little strong, so let's maybe do like 8. Every time in game development, you kind of have to tweak these numbers a lot just to get it right, and it's a lot of testing. You don't always get it right the first time, but this is a pretty good start, I would say. Nice amount of flap, and I think also he could fall a little faster too. So let's actually switch these out with some variables just to make this a little bit easier to change. And we'll call this flap amount equals 8. And we'll change, this is going to be flap amount. Okay, let's organize this a little bit. Bring this flap down here, bring our player X stuff down here, and we'll kind of name this little section. I'll call this set initial variables. That will make this section, we'll call this tweaks. Yeah, so flap amount is going to be 8, gravity is going to be 1 for now. So here we'll just say P1 plus gravity, like that. Py plus gravity, just like that. And let's make gravity a little bit stronger. Gravity equals 2. I'll hit save, and now we have a pretty good little Flappy Bird going. Look at that. Oh, baby. This is like the big part of the game. And that feels pretty nice to me. He dives pretty quickly. I can flap him all the way up at the top pretty quickly. Yeah, that looks nice. Now, one thing is that if I let go, he will fall down forever, and I would have to flap a lot to get him back. So what we want to do is probably just have him stop at the bottom of the screen. So how do we do something like that? Well, if we think about the problem that the bird shouldn't go lower than a certain point, we can think about kind of how to code that. So every frame on update, we're going to know where our player is. And so I think after all of this, let's say if py equals, well, the screen is 128 by 128, and the bird is 8 pixels high. So let's say 120. If player y equals 120, actually what we need to do is if player y is greater than or equal to 120, then we need to do something. What do we do? Well, let's just keep him at 120. Py equals 120. So if he sinks down below 120, he's just going to stick right at 120. Okay, so let's see how that works. I'll hit save and run. And now, yeah, he sticks at the bottom of the screen. And we can still flap him, but he isn't going to go down into eternity. Okay, he'll just kind of stay at the bottom of the screen. We should probably do the same thing for the top of the screen because we don't want him to be like 50 miles up in the sky. Okay. Let's just actually put this in an else. So else if, what we're doing here is if this isn't true, then we're going to do something else. Okay. So we could just have it do anything else. Basically, if this isn't true, then do something. But we could also have it, if this isn't true and something else is true, like py is less than 0, then py equals 0. End. Okay. So now we can't go up too much and we can't go down too much. And it just keeps the world sane. All right. Pretty cool. This is always a good idea to kind of limit how far your character will go, because you might know to keep him on screen, but somebody who plays your game probably isn't going to know to keep it on screen, and they're going to lose them. And this happens to me all the time, is I'll forget to put limits on the character, and then they'll just walk off screen and they'll be like, I lost my character. I'm like, you idiot. Why would you do that? And then I'm like, no, I'm actually the idiot because I didn't build in a failsafe. So we'll just do that from the beginning. Sound good? All right. So our like main gameplay is actually kind of a thing now, which is pretty sweet. Okay. So one thing we got to do is get these pipes moving from right to left so that we can actually fly through things. That's kind of one of our first problems. So how do we do something like that? Well, one thing that we could do is make a great big wide map and have the map scroll. But for something like this, that's going to be possibly infinite pipes, we don't really want to do that. If this were just a platformer where, you know, you have a level that you've designed, that might be a good idea. But for something like this, we want to actually move these with code. And for that, let's start to get a little bit crazy here. We've been using these built-in functions, but we can actually make our own functions to kind of break out some of this code and to do some more fancy things. So all we have to do is go down here at the bottom and type function, and then whatever word we want to kind of make our own function. And so let's call this ipipes. So this is initialize pipes, okay? And what we're going to do is put code in here that is basically the same kind of code that we would put in init, but we're just going to put it in here to kind of keep ourselves organized, okay? All we have to do is copy this name of this function, and I'll go up to init, and here after stuff, we'll just call this sub functions. And I'll put this function call right here. So what it's going to do is right here, it's going to act like I typed in whatever I type in right here. So it's just kind of a little placeholder for all the code that I'm going to put right here. Okay. And here we're going to say set up pipes. And I'm actually going to copy and paste this function. Let's do an update pipes as well. And we'll also do a draw pipes. Okay. And let's take these and copy them into our other functions here. So this one's under update. So instead of doing all the update code here in update, I'm just going to say update pipes, and same thing here for draw pipes. But the difference here is I'm actually going to draw this right after our map because PICO-8 draws things in the order that we type this stuff, kind of in different layers. So the first thing it'll do is clear the screen, then it'll draw the map. On top of the map, we're going to draw the pipes. On top of the pipes, we're going to draw the sprite, okay? By on top, I don't mean like actually higher on screen. I mean in front of it when it comes to like the layers. So I pipes, U pipes, D pipes, that's great. But this is getting a little bit long. And so what I want to do instead of scrolling a bunch is I'm going to make a new tab here. The second tab, I'm going to make this the pipes. So I'll hit dash dash and then pipes. And this kind of lets me name this tab. So if I go over it, I can see the first line of this tab. And you can think of the tabs as just the continuation of this same document, right? So instead of having this down at the bottom of this tab, I'm going to select all of this and hit Control X to cut it. I'm going to put this in this first tab here like this. So now we have our code that we've already written, and then we have code for our pipes. So this is just an easy way to stay organized. We could certainly write this all out in one great big thing here. It's just hard to be organized is all. So now that we have kind of a clean table here, let's set things up. And this is where things get really fun because you can kind of make up how you want to do something like this. So let's just take a second and think about this. Anytime that we draw one of these pipes, it's going to move from right to left. And just like our player has a X and a Y value, our pipes can have an X and a Y value. In fact, we're going to draw this in very much the same way by drawing a sprite and giving it an X and a Y. The difference is our sprite is going to be this big long pipe. So let's think about this. We want a sprite that draws this pipe that goes from right to left on the screen. And we already know how to make something move because we did that with our bird. So let's just go ahead and kind of try something here. I'm going to grab this sprite right here, sprite 7. But what I really want to do is draw sprite 7 a little bit wider like this. So 2 by 2. Okay. So sprite 7, let's just go ahead and here in our draw, let's say SPR 7, and we need an X and a Y. So let's do for X, this is out of 128. So let's do like 80 just to try this out, and 63 to be in the middle on the Y like this. Let's go to our map and we'll erase these pipes for now. I can scroll to zoom out like that. Okay. And now let's save and run. And look, there's our sprite, which is part of our pipe, but it's only drawing a little bit of it. Why is that? Well, we're only telling it to draw sprite 7, which is just this little corner. We can tell it to draw sprite 7 a little bit wider and use more of these tiles by adding a couple more numbers here. These numbers, by the way, these are called arguments. These are, again, how something happens. So sprite is what we're doing, and this is how it happens. And actually, the next two numbers here are the width and the height of the sprite. So 2, 2, like that. Now let's see what happens. Oh, baby, look at that. We have some stuff going on. Okay, okay, all right. That's kind of what we want. So how do we get that to move from right to left? Well, same way that we did with our player. Let's go ahead and set up our pipes thing. Let's call this P1X. That's for pipe 1X equals 80. And P1Y equals 63. Okay, so this is P1X and P1Y. Let's run this. Yep, does the same thing. Okay. So now for update, let's say P1X equals P1X minus 1. Okay, so every frame we're going to take the value of P1x and we're going to get rid of 1. That should move it to the left. Look at that. Yes. Okay. By the way to kind of shorthand this a little bit so you don't have to type as much is just type P1x minus equals 1. You can also do plus equals 1 to add 1 each time, but this is a great little thing to use. So now that moves to the left. Okay, we're getting somewhere. Okay, but now if we play this, it's just going to go away forever and then we got nothing to do, right? So what we actually want this to do is sort of loop. So as it goes off the screen, we want it to come back on the right. And we can do this much the same way that we did with our bird, keeping him on screen with this if statement, okay? So actually, let's do if P1x is less than 0, then P1x equals 128. Let's see what happens there. So as this goes off, it kind of moves to the other side. So this is sort of what we want, except for it's stopping a little early. That's because each sprite, its location is the upper left-hand corner. And as it moves off screen, once it goes past this little edge, it's less than 0 and then it moves over, but we still see these 16 pixels. So what we actually need to do is make this -16 like this. And so it goes all the way off screen before it comes back. Ooh, now we have this looping kind of thing, which is definitely what we are after. Okay, all right, okay, that's pretty sweet. This is one of our poips. Okay, so there are a lot of things wrong with this, but you can see kind of where we're getting at. One thing that's obviously wrong is we need this pipe to extend to the bottom of the screen. So how do we do that? Well, there are a lot of ways to do that. There's some fancy things that are maybe a little too advanced for this tutorial that it would probably be like the right way to do it. But because we're doing a pretty small, simple game, we can do kind of a sort of a hack way of doing it. We can make this sprite just really tall. So what I can do is just select this. I'll hit Control C, and then you can see these little tabs here. These tabs are actually kind of sections of the same sprite sheet. And so if I scroll out here, this is kind of like one big sprite sheet that's just kind of chopped into these little sections. And so if I line this up in these tabs and say like, I'll just hit Control C, switch to the second tab and hit Control V like this, then I can kind of make this really big and long. And if I zoom out, we see we have a much longer sprite, okay? It's sort of hard to tell, but we have a really long, here's our whole sprite sheet. We have this really long sprite sheet right here, okay? So we can make this really, really long. Let's just go ahead and I'll just hold Shift, Control C. Let's go to the very bottom of this. Just kind of zoom out, move this around. Oops. Okay, I'll just copy this a little bit here. Okay, so now if we go to the top here and we zoom all the way out, we should see on this sprite sheet, if we're zoomed all the way out, we have the top of our pipe here at the top and bottom of our pipe here at the bottom. So we can kind of use this as a great big sprite to move this left and right and save ourselves a lot of kind of fancier coding. It's kind of an awkward way to draw it here, but it's totally going to work. So now let's count how tall this thing is. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 tiles tall, and it's 2 tiles wide. So remember in our sprite code here, this is the width and this is the height. So let's say 16. So now we can draw that big tall sprite and look, oh baby. Now we have that big tall sprite just moving left to right. And what's really cool is we can also use this as the top sprite. If we do something like, let's make this P1Y, let's say like -63. Now we can see the bottom of that sprite moving and we have the top side of our pipes as well. In fact, let's call this pipe 1 bottom X. Okay, and I'll just put a B after all of these. Easy to do right now. So let's say draw bottom pipe. And this shouldn't do anything different. Okay, there's the bottom pipe. Now let's draw the top pipe as well. We can just copy this sprite code like this. But this top pipe, we can actually use all of these same things, but we can actually kind of base this top pipe off of the bottom pipe. Ooh, okay. So here, let's do this. Draw top pipe. This. We can think about this as like, okay, if we're drawing this pipe, if it's drawing this bottom pipe, what we really want is the top pipe to be a certain amount over it, okay? So maybe we could take this bottom Y and then take some pixels away from that. So like, let's do 128 pixels away from that, okay? So this is gonna move this copy, oops, this is gonna move this copy up 128 pixels. So now we have these two together. We have the top pipe on top of the bottom pipe, but there's no gap in between them. But that's pretty neat, okay? So maybe we want this gap to be a little bit bigger. So maybe we want this to be 48. So we'll have a 20 pixel gap. And now we're really looking like a Flappy Bird game, huh? We could even kind of play this. Of course, it's impossible to lose because we don't have any collision or anything that says whether we lose or win, but you kind of get the idea, right? Okay, so let's make this easier on ourselves. What we need to do is make it easy to change that gap amount later. So let's just call this one minus 128, and we'll also minus our gap, G-A-P. So I'll go over here to iPipes, and let's make gap, and we'll equal 20. So this should do the same thing. Yep, okay, plus a 20 gap. So we can easily change this to a 30 gap. That makes that bigger, or a smaller gap like 4. Now it has a little baby gap, right? Not baby gap, not like the store. Okay, this is a great start. So what's next? Well, we want these to be at different heights every time. We don't want to just be in the middle each time. We want it to be kind of randomly up and down. So one thing that we can do is for our Y at the very beginning, let's make this a random number. So we can do that by typing RND, that's for random, and then the range of what we want inside of these parentheses. So we could say 128, okay? So this is going to draw that pipe somewhere between 0 and 128, but it only does it when we run the game because that's in the init function, right? So it's sort of doing what we want, but it's only doing it at the beginning and then it's keeping that same height. What we actually want it to do is do it every time that the pipe is off screen. So actually we already have code for this. If the pipe is less than 16, then we're resetting the X. So why don't we just put this kind of thing down here as we're resetting it. So this is going to set random height. This is going to reset X. And now as these pipes go by, they're going to be at random heights, getting us mixed up. Now they're a little bit too high sometimes. Like that doesn't make any sense. We need to keep it inside of a range here. So instead of 128, why don't we do this? Why don't we keep it sort of in the middle of the screen? So why don't we do like, keep it 16 off of each side. So let's say 16 from the top plus whatever 128 minus 16 is. We could just do that math right here, but actually we want it to be 16 from the bottom too. So let's take 16 off of that. So that'd be 32 minus 32. Okay. We could do that quick math, but you know, it's fine, right? So now that's going to keep this within that range, and it's always going to have some kind of gap that we can fly through. All right. That looks nice. This is working pretty well. I think that gap needs to be bigger. So let's say 32 and maybe 24. But sometimes our gap is off of screen too. So maybe we need to add our gap too. Let's say plus gap and then 128 minus gap. So we'll make sure that we're within the gap section here. So it always keeps that gap on screen. Nothing silly happens. Always at a different height. Yeah, our range actually might be too little now. So maybe we'll take the 16s away. See how that goes. Ooh, yeah, we need to keep that on. There we go. And I think that'll do for now. Just kind of randomly generating where this gap needs to be. And that's pretty good. Yeah. Okay. Ooh, that one's way down below. Schloop. All right. Again, maybe we'll do like -8 for that. Maybe 8 here. Always want that gap on screen. Okay, so things are looking pretty good. But to make this actually a game, we need to do a couple things. First thing that we need to do is make it so that we can score when we go past one of these pipes. So we got to be able to tell if we go through that gap, if we go past the pipe. The other thing we got to do is lose if we hit one of the pipes, because right now we can just go through here and it's not that big a deal. So let's start out with the score. We'll just start out with an initial variable here. It's just called score. And we'll start with 0. And let's print that to the screen. And let's have that just appear in the upper left-hand corner. We can do that with a function called print, P-R-I-N-T. And normally you could just say, some text here in quotes. This is called a string. It just means some text or, a quote, a bunch of text that you can print to the screen or that you can use inside of a variable. We'll save and run and see we have some text up there in the upper left. That'll do for now, but instead of some text, we'll say score like that, and that will print score, which is 0. Now, to remind ourselves what this is, let's actually combine those things. And you can combine two strings in this way. And I'll make a string here and I'll just say score, colon, space. And then to put this together, you put 2 dots like that. So 2 dots, and then you can either put another string like this, or you can put a variable that turns into a string, whatever. That will totally work like that. Save, run. And now it says score, it has kind of a label there, and then it says 0, okay? That looks good. We'll just keep that there so that we can keep track of our score. Now we need the score to actually go up when we go past one of those pipes. So let's go over to our pipes function here. This is what moves the pipes around. And one thing that we can use is this P1BX. So that's pipe 1, part B, the X value, that's 80. And this is going to change as the pipe moves from right to left. And what we really want to know is this pipe to the left of the bird? Because every time it goes to the left of the bird without us losing the game, which we'll build in here eventually, we're going to get a point. So we can compare this value with the X value of our bird, which would be player X. So let's just make a new tab here and we'll say score. And we'll call this function uScore like this. We'll make sure that we call that here in our main update function. Just do this sort of towards the end, uScore. Let's do U_score. Lots of scores, just to keep things consistent like that. Okay, so now every frame we want to check and see if the score is gonna go up or not. So we need P1BX. So let's say if P1BX is greater than player X, then score plus equals 1. So we'll add 1 to the score. Now this isn't quite going to do what we want, but let's see what it does. Save, run. Every time that is greater than our bird, it adds a lot to the score. So there's a couple things wrong. It's adding a lot to the score, and we also want it less than the bird because I didn't think about that. So we actually want this less than the bird. So let's fix that. So now when we go past it, the score starts going up, and then it stops when that variable is reset and the pipe goes back to the right. So we only want this to happen once. So instead of less than px, we could just say equals px, which when you're testing for something, you're asking if something is equal. You actually have to do 2 equals like that, because 1 equal means that you are setting a value. So if I say P1BX equals px, that's setting px to be this value, and it's going to get confused. If I say save and run, it's going to go, what are you doing? We need 2 equals like that. Okay. So now it says score equals 1 and boop, score equals 2. Oh, baby, that's going to work just fine. Look at that. Boop, score equals 3. That's great. Now this is only working because we are moving these pipes 1 pixel per frame. And eventually it is going to be equal to our bird. If they're moving 2 pixels per frame, it's possible we could miss the bird at some point. So we might have to do something fancier, but this totally works for this game. Super convenient. Love it. Okay, so we're adding 1 to our score every time our X is equal to our player X. Great. So now let's make it so that we have to fly through that gap. We can't just go through this side like this, that we're going to lose if we hit the side of the pipe. So how do we do that? Well, we need to check a couple things. First of all, we need to check if our character is close enough to the pipe to actually run into it. And then we also need to check and make sure that if the bird is not in this gap here, which we get to do with lots of math. So let's call this tab, since this is short, let's say score/collision. We could put these on separate tabs, but it's fine. Okay, function collide. Let's just do something like that. Again, we're just making this up. All we have to do is type this exactly the same as what we call in our update here. So we'll just say collide like that. And we're going to use this to test the collision. And again, what we need to figure out is if something is true. So if our player is close enough to the pipe on the x-axis, and if he's not in the right place in the y-axis. So we actually kind of know how to figure out if he's close to the pipe. It's basically this, but we're going to do this just a little differently. So if the player's position x minus P1bx, that is the position of the pipe, is less than 4, then we're colliding. So what this is this is testing kind of how close these things are, but it's only doing it in one direction. So player X, so if player X was at 63 minus player 1BX, so maybe that is at 60, that would give us 3. And if that's less than 4, then something is true. But if the pipe is further to the right, then that's going to give us a negative number all the time, and that's always going to be true. So we don't want to be testing for this like when the pipe is anywhere on the right of the screen. We want it to be just within a certain radius of our character. And so what we can actually do is use a function called absolute value, ABS, like this. And this will always check basically the difference between these two. And this is kind of the radius. And so this is a nice way to figure out if something's close to something else. So if player X minus player 1BX is less, if that absolute value, which if you're not familiar, an absolute value changes a negative number to a positive number, or it leaves a positive number as it is. It's always returns a positive. If that's less than 4, meaning is this close enough on the x-axis, then we're going to do something else, okay? So this is the first part. This is the x-axis, right? We also need to figure out where are we on the y-axis. And we can do that actually with this variable P1by, okay? So if player Y is less than P1by, then we are colliding, okay? But we also, actually, if this is more than P1by, because what we want is to figure out, is the player, first of all, close, like it is right, is the player close to the pipe, and is he under the gap? That P1by is right here on this sprite, and we're going to test if he's under that point and close on the x-axis, which basically means that he's running into this, okay? If that's true, then we're colliding. Let's kind of test this out with a variable. We'll say col equals true. Let's go to our beginning here. We'll just say col equals false. This is just a little global variable that we're setting just to help us kind of test this. And we're going to say print col. So it should be false at the beginning. And then once we run into that, it's going to say true. Yeah. Okay, so that's working. Okay, if it's greater than P1by, then that's true. The other thing that would make them collide is else if Py is less than P1by minus the gap, then col equals true. And then every other time, collision is going to be false, right? Okay, so let's run this. Okay, so he's true there. Collision's true there. But if we go through this and we go through the gap, yeah, then it's false. So if it stays false, if we do this right, that means that our collision is set up right. So there's false, yep, false. That was true because I bonked it. False, this is pretty hard. That's true, up here, it's true. Okay, so it looks like that's working, false. Okay, great. So now it's setting this collision variable to true if we hit the sides of the pipe, and it's leaving it as false if we don't. So now we need this to actually do something, which is where we're going to have to change things around a little bit. So far, what we've done is we've built everything kind of just in these built-in functions, which is totally fine, except for we want something like a start screen, and we want a game over screen and that kind of thing, which we really should do by kind of wrapping all of this in a great big if statement, okay? So all of this, everything that is happening here in our update function, let's say, that is happening during like our normal game state. That means just when things are happening that, during the gameplay. What we want is for this to only happen when our game is started and not to happen on the menus or the pause screen or anything like that. So one thing that we can do is we could just wrap a big if statement around this and make this long and complicated, but it would be a good idea, I would say, to make this into its own function. So I'll just hit Control X to cut that. and we'll say game update, and let's say update game like that. And then we'll just make another function here, update game, and we'll throw that down there. This should act exactly the same. Yep, works fine. So now we have update game right there, okay? We'll do the same thing for draw, like this, boop, update draw, okay? And as far as the init, I think we'll probably just leave that how it is, okay? So this should work the same way if we didn't mess anything up. Okay, great. And now it's a little bit easier to kind of do what we're gonna do next here. So for update, what we're gonna do is we're gonna start with a state. So a state is just what something is doing right now, okay? And again, this is one of those things you can kind of make up and customize to whatever you want. So we'll set initial variables. We'll just say state equals game, just like that. And for update, we'll say if state equals, double equals, game, then we update game. I'll select all of these and then hit tab to just move it over. And kind of the same thing here. If state equals game, then update draw. This shouldn't be update draw. This should be draw game. Okay, so now we have our states here and it should, again, work the same way. Great. So now we can do an else and have different states, right? So let's start with the draw. If state equals game, then draw game. Else if state equals game over, then draw game over. Okay, see what we're getting at here? And now let's make a function down here. Function draw game over. And let's just print game over. Okay. So now that we have this kind of built, if our character runs into the side of our pipes, we can just switch the state. If collision is true, then we just switch the state. Okay. So state equals game over. Just like that. So let's save and run. Boom, game over. Look at that. Okay, this is kind of what we want, but we actually, in the draw function here for game over, we want to make sure we clear the screen. So now, boom, we hit game over. Great. We also want a way to restart. So we also want an update game over. So we'll just make this function here. Update game over. And we'll say if button pressed, let's do O this time. That's going to be Z on our keyboard. Then let's just say init. Let's just call that init function. So this is like the beginning function of our game, right? So we're basically just restarting our game if we call init, okay? Other thing we have to do is make sure that we call our update game over function here. In our update, if our state is game over. Else if state equals game over, then we update game over. Okay, save this. All right, game over. And then if I hit Z, we restart. We need maybe a little bit more time. So why don't we start that pipe at 128? See, where's our pipe? There we go. BX, let's do 128. So it's off screen totally, okay? There we go. There it is. We got score 1. Nice. Score 2. Oh no. Game over. Oh baby, this is an actual game now. Look at that. It's very difficult. Oh no. But it's an actual game. I think we need to make that gap a little bigger. And the nice thing is that we've built this in a way where everything is based on this gap. So we could say 36 here, make that gap bigger, and our collision and everything should still work. Everything should work fine. Yeah, there we go. Now we have a pretty good looking actual game. Look at this. That's neat. All right, baby. This might be just a little too easy now. Yep. Okay, let's make this not quite so big. Maybe 32. Yep, that works. Okay, the other thing we got to do is actually give the user instructions during this game over, because they're not going to know to hit that Z button. Let's say print game over, and then let's say press Z to restart. Okay, boom. press Z to restart. Okay, that works. I think it'd be nicer if this were sort of in the middle though. So we can add a couple arguments to this print function. The next one would be an X value. So let's try like, I don't know, 40 for X and 60 for Y. Yeah, okay, that's getting there. It's all right, it's okay. But we want these to kind of be in the middle. We can do a fancy thing. Let's do this one like 68. This one's not going to be at 40. This one's going to be at like 30 maybe. See how that looks. All right, this is pretty close to the middle. Let's do like 28 on this one and like 44 on this one. That's pretty close. Close enough. You can make it better on yours if you want to. Game over, press Z to restart. Boom. Oh, baby, we got it going on. Sweet. I love it. Okay, we just need a start screen now. So we're going to do this basically the same way. Let's make a function draw start. And we'll also have a function update start. And these are going to be very similar. I'll go ahead and grab the draw game over function. Let's put this on start. And we'll call this Flappy boy. Press Z to start. Okay, we'll do the same thing, update start like this. But instead of init, we'll just say state equals game like that for our update start. And at our very beginning where we say our state, we'll say start for our state. And then the only thing we have to do is put in the logic here. So else if, let's put this else if state is start, then update start. Else if state equals start, then draw start. Okay, so now Flappy boy, press Z to start. Boom, we're going. Oh no! There we go. Looking pretty good. Yeah. And at this point, it's a lot more just playing around with the game and making sure that you like it, making sure that the controls work and that it feels fun, that it's not too hard, not too easy, and tweaking from there. One thing I think we'll do for the start screen is we'll just put our map in here so we can see those clouds at the beginning. Yeah, Flappy boy, press Z to start. I think that second line is off center a little bit. So let's move that over. Yeah, it's a little closer. Flappy boy, press Z to start. Boom. All right. Okay, so it basically works. One thing that I do want to do, I think just as our final little thing, is let's clean up our artwork a little bit. We want our bird to flap, and we want to get rid of this blue because we don't need the blue in the background if we're just drawing a sprite over the map. So I'll just zoom all the way out here, grab the paint bucket and paint this black like this. There we go. Okay. So now everything is, yeah, everything's good. We also want him to flap. So let's make another frame here. I'll hit Control C and Control V just to copy and paste these sprites. And let's get rid of his wing and let's make his wing up like this for one frame. So he's flapping like this. See what I'm talking about? Normally let's have him on frame 2. And then when we hit the button, we'll have him flap and go to frame 1. So right here in our sprite function for our player, this is what tells us what sprite to draw. And so let's do PSPR for player sprite. We'll go up here, the initial value PSPR equals 2. All right. So now it should do the same thing, except for he has the up wing for his artwork there. Okay. And now when we hit that button to flap, we can switch out this artwork. So PSPR, which is our player sprite, we're going to make that 1. That's when we're flapping. And actually we can do this while the flap is greater than 0, and then else PSPR equals 2. So this will automatically flip between these two sprites because our flap is kind of automatically resetting it anyway. So now we have it, he flaps when he's going up. Yeah, so he animates, he kind of flaps when we push him up like this. Very nice, very nice. Okay, so that's our basic Flappy Bird game. Let's take out this extra print. And I think she's ready for prime time. Press Z to start. We have a great little game that is a little bit difficult. That's great. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this. This has been super fun. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments. If you want to see more videos like this, subscribe. If you watched all the way to the end of this massively long video, you definitely got to leave a like, man. Got to do that. So yeah, I hope this helps you with your PICO-8 games. There's a lot to just even a little game like this, a lot of foundational kind of stuff. So I hope that it's been really helpful. Have fun making your own Flappy kind of games, and I'll catch you next time.